Hello and welcome to the Starting Sisters series, where we go from the first purchase to the first 2,000 point army list and everything in between for the Sisters of Battle, also known as the Adepta Sororitas. In this video, we'll be looking at the heavy support choices for the Sisters of Battle army. Though before we begin, there is a correction I would like to make, as well as to address some changes Games Workshop has made to some of the sister units we've looked at prior to now and how it affects them. To start off, the correction I need to make is that in the prior video, I covered the Repressor tank as one of the Sisters' transport options. However, that is no longer true, as in the newest Forge World publication, the Repressor has been placed into the Legendary category, which means that it is no longer an option outside of casual games. I would like to thank my viewers for bringing this to my attention, as it really helps information within my videos stay accurate. As for the changes that have come out of the recent rules update, most of them are rather minor, but they're still rather important to understand. Let's take a look at these changes in terms of video order. The first being a change that affected the Canoness, which is an HQ choice. For the most part, the Canoness remains the same, but has received a rather substantial buff in that the Null Rod is now a free upgrade as opposed to costing 10 points. The Null Rod was already a good option and saw play, but now it should be taken every time, especially on a Becky, as it offers her both protection against Psychers as well as some additional ability to deny them their psychic powers as a whole. The other big thing to keep in mind is that this probably edges out the Brazier as an option, due to that still costing 10 points, and reduces the likelihood you'd take anything but a Chainsword or Beneficence on a Canoness, as you can only take the Null Rod if she has a Chainsword type weapon. I'm not sure why they buffed the Canoness, as she was already rather strong, but if they did want to buff her as such, they should have done the same to the other options as well, because as it stands, one is clearly better than other options at this point, making it harder to justify variance. And whenever they reduce the ability for players to have different choices, be at a similar power level, that's never a good change, because you always want to have the most options available to you so that you can tailor your units to play how you want them to play, as opposed to having certain options be strictly better than others, where you're forced into taking something like the Null Rod because it is so inexpensive, and you're kind of being punished for taking something that might be a little more fun to play, for example. Following the Canoness change, we come to the troop slot, as well as any other unit that can carry a Simulacrum Imperialis, such as the Dominions, Celestians, and Retributors. The Simulacrum is now free instead of costing 5 points, and as such, you should take it, as it's now a free buff to your units. I actually really like this change, as the Simulacrum doesn't directly buff the unit stats, but rather it gives them the option to make better use of the Acts of Faith ability, which gives a player more choice, not less choice. After the troops, the transport saw a minor change in that the Sororitas Rhino went up by 2 points to a total of 80 points instead of 78 points. While this makes the Immolator look very slightly better by comparison, it's a negligible change and doesn't really have an impact besides being a minor tax on the Rhino, which remains very strong and still remains as one of the best transports in the game. Two units we haven't covered but have spoken about also saw changes, with the Repentia going up by 1 point per model and the Zephyrum going down by 2 points per model. This makes the Zephyrum a little bit better and the Repentia a little bit worse, but both are still incredibly playable and powerful units. I don't think this will reduce the number of Repentia we see, but it may increase the number of Zephyrum we see, which is always a good thing as it increases the unit diversity. Finally, the last unit to see a change was the Retributors from the heavy support slot, which brings us into the first unit of this video. The Retributors went up by 2 points per model, which isn't the end of the world, as they were already rather expensive when kitted out with their special weapons. But what's more important is they went up by 1 power level, which is rather significant, as it makes it harder for them to go into strategic reserves due to command point cost. It's not as big of a difference when you're running a squad of 5 Retributors, as it's still only 1 command point, but once you reach 6 or more Retributors, you now have to pay 2 command points per squad instead of the 1 command point prior. This definitely limits their squad size more than any other change we've seen so far, but it's not the end of the world, as many times you'd run them as a base size of 5. So now that we know what changes were made to the Retributors, we should look at what the Retributors are. The Retributors are a unit of Sisters of Battle that take up a heavy support choice, as up to 4 Retributors can swap out their normal bolt gun for one of 3 heavy weapons options, being a heavy bolter, a heavy flamer, and the very prevalent multi-melta. Additionally, as they are heavy weapons experts, unlike normal Sisters of Battle, they don't suffer a penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons, thanks to their faithful advance ability, which makes them the best choice for heavy weapons as far as sister-sized units go. The most common heavy weapons choice for the Retributors is 4 multi-meltas, as each multi-melta gives you 2 shots at strength 8, which means you'll be wounding anything with toughness 4 or less on a 2+, and whatever you shoot will probably not receive a normal armor save, as the melta has an armor penalty penetration of 4. So as a whole, the Multi-Melta is a weapon that is great at pretty much anything it shoots, being able to obliterate troops while having a rather easy time taking out vehicles as well. Additionally, the Retributors can take up to 2 Armorium Cherubs for 5 points each, which can be consumed to allow a model to shoot a second time within the same shooting phase. And while the Armorium Cherub isn't restricted to the Multi-Melta option, it's definitely the best with it due to how powerful the Multi-Melta is, as well as it being the most expensive option. As for the Heavy Bolter or Heavy Flamer options, while they are playable and benefit from certain orders, they are definitely uncommon on Retributors. The primary reason being that Multi-Meltas are generally more efficient, as well as being rare within the army, whereas other units like the Immolator or the Mortifiers can give you access to Heavy Bolters and Flamers for a comparable cost as the Retributors. Though I should mention the Retributors have a special ability which adds 4 inches to their Heavy Flamer range, giving them the ability to outrange most Flamer options. Although the Seraphim gain 6 inches on their hand Flamers when using their special stratagem Deadly Descent, which slightly outranges the Retributors in terms of Flamer weapons. A few other things to consider when outfitting your Retributors is what order to place them in, as different orders benefit different heavy weapons, while other orders benefit their shooting or survivability as a whole. While many choose to place them within Valorous Heart to help with survivability, others have began to place them within Bloody Rose, so that when they inevitably do end up in close combat, they can inflict some damage with their bolt pistols before being destroyed. Furthermore, you should consider if you wish to place them within transports or strategic reserves, as they are a priority target for your opponents. It's important to keep them safe until you can safely get off a round of shooting at full power. You can also opt to give the Retributor Superior a combi weapon, so that when you are in range of her weapons and their special weapons, you can make use of the Holy Trinity stratagem that gives them +1 to wound if they are in range to shoot with a Bolter, Melta, and Flamer weapon at one target, and all of them do so. It's not a vital stratagem, especially with the strength of the Multi-Meltas, but it's a nice perk to have. Finally, they have a special stratagem unique to them that benefits each special weapon differently, and this stratagem is called Storm of Retribution. This is a rather expensive stratagem at 2 command points, but it can be rather useful. What this stratagem does is when you choose to shoot with a squad, you select to buff one of the weapon types, and they gain the following abilities. For the Heavy Bolter, they gain +1 to hit. For the Heavy Flamer, they can reroll the wound rolls, and for the Multi-Melta, they add 12 inches to their range and 1 to their damage roll. Based on the command point cost of the stratagem, I would definitely say it's balanced around the Multi-Melta ability, seeing as it not only extends the range by 50% of the Multi-Melta, but also adds to the already impressive damage profile. As a whole, the Retributors are a very powerful unit that has some of the strongest shooting in the army, but it is a very fragile unit that can be easily wiped out and is a priority target for your opponent. As such, it is very important to think about how to keep them safe, as well as what characters and orders to run them with, as it can drastically change how long they stay on the table as well. However, in most cases, it's less of a question of if they'll be taken off the table, but rather when will they be taken off the table. So making the best of them while they remain alive is vital to your success with them. After the Retributors, we come to the Mortifier, which is probably my favorite unit within the Sisters of Battle army. The reason for this being that the Mortifier is not only a very powerful unit, but an incredibly versatile one that can play many different roles, not only within a list, but even during a game, as the weapon options for it might not be as strong as those on the Retributors, but they offer more versatility, as the Mortifier is a massive threat within shooting or melee combat. To understand why the Mortifier is so versatile, we need to first look at the weapon options, as it can either be armed with 2 Heavy Bolters or 2 Heavy Flamers, as well as options to have one of each. However, you will almost always prefer the Heavy Bolters, as this gives the Mortifiers a lot of shooting power so that it can hang back and function as an artillery piece, or it can put out shots while it moves along the board, because it has special ability that allows it to treat the Heavy Bolters as an assault weapon instead of a heavy weapon. Considering a Mortifier is only 60 points and can be taken in a squad of 4, it can easily outgun Retributors armed with Heavy Bolters. And don't forget, recently the Heavy Bolters were buffed to have a damage profile of 2, which is very good against the very popular armies of Marines. Though the Mortifier doesn't only have a shooting weapon, but also comes with a choice of melee weapons, being either a Buzzblade or flails. And while the Buzzblade isn't the worst option, as it can really hurt heavily armored units, the flail is generally the better option, because with its special ability, each Mortifier armed with double flails puts out a total of 15 attacks each, with a strength characteristic of 6. This makes the Mortifier an absolute powerhouse in melee when it comes to clearing out both swarms, as well as being rather efficient at dealing with mid-range size units. Although, you can make the argument for taking some Buzzblades within an army as well, seeing as they still offer the Mortifier up to 5 attacks with a strength profile of 8 and an armor penetration of 3, which isn't terrible incredible. You can even take a mix of the two and see how that works out for you. As for the general stat line of the Mortifiers, it's also very impressive for the points cost, as it moves somewhat quickly at 9 inches and has a toughness of 5, which makes it harder to wound, though it does only have an armor save of 4+, which can be increased to a 3+ for 5 points on a single model by upgrading it to an Anchorite, which isn't the best, but each Mortifier also comes with a 6+ Feel No Pain, which adds a bit to the resilience. So as a whole, it's reasonably resilient, but if your opponent does destroy one in melee, the Mortifier has a special ability that causes it to essentially explode on a 4+, causing D3 mortal wounds to each enemy within 1 inch. That's a rather scary prospect, as not only does it not hit your units, but it can put out quite a lot of mortal wounds with this ability. In fact, if you put a Mortifier against a heavy armored unit such as a knight, you can actually do a lot of damage just with the mortal wounds without even hitting with the Mortifier. Though even then, with the number of attacks the Mortifier has, it'll chip away slightly by itself before exploding. So don't forget, you get the ranged weapons, the melee weapons, and all of the previously mentioned abilities for only 60 points for each Mortifier. That's not even mentioning that the Mortifier has a special stratagem which allows them to fight a second time within the same combat phase. It's a rather expensive stratagem at 3 command points, but considering a unit of 4 Mortifiers with double flails puts out a total of 60 attacks normally, and that goes up to 120 attacks with this stratagem, it's doubtful that most things locked in combat with them will survive. So to wrap up the Mortifier, the reason it is so versatile is because it comes with powerful shooting, powerful melee, a rather resilient stat line, and a reasonably fast moving speed for a very low points cost. And as it is rather good at pretty much everything, you can use it as a spearhead unit to charge into enemies, or as a shooting unit that screens other units in case something comes within melee threat range, or you can even take a couple of individual Mortifiers and use them as general cleanup units to run around vacant parts of the board and either deny or capture objectives, because a single Mortifier can bully most objective goons within the game. That's why you'll see Mortifiers in all kinds of configurations within the game, from single unit Mortifiers to squads of 4 and even 3 squads of 4 within one army, as it's an incredibly powerful and versatile unit. You may not see it in every list, but you'll see it in a large portion of lists, and it's never bad to own some Mortifiers because you can play them in so many different play styles so that you can really optimize them to how you prefer to play them. Following the Mortifier is another rather powerful unit within the Sisters of Battle army, but unlike the Retributors and the Mortifiers, you'll generally see the Exorcist tank significantly less often. The reason for this being that while the Exorcist isn't bad in itself, starting off at 165 points and going up to 195 points if you want to take the stronger of the 2 weapon options. As far as the stat line goes for the Exorcist, it's definitely not bad, seeing as it has 8 toughness and 12 wounds, as well as a 3+ armor save, and benefits from the different Sisters abilities such as Shield of Faith that provides it with an invulnerable save, something that's not particularly common on tanks. Generally, you'll want to park the Exorcist near a character that can buff not only its shooting but also its invulnerable save to push the power of this unit as much as possible due to how much you're investing into it even at a 2000 point game. In terms of weapons, the Exorcist always comes equipped with a heavy bolter, which is fine, and then it has an option of one of 2 missile weapons. The default weapon is called the Conflagration Rockets and offers a lot of shots, but only at strength 5 and damage 1, so for the most part it isn't that worthwhile because the Sisters army isn't going to have too much difficulty clearing out swarms that this weapon targets. Besides, the most shots you'll get out of this weapon is 18 plus the 3 heavy bolter shots for that 165 points, whereas if you take 3 Mortifiers you pay 180 points and get 18 heavy bolter shots, which are going to do more for you usually, while also gaining access to their insane melee options. While on the other hand, both missile weapons on the Exorcist are blast weapons, meaning you can get locked into combat very easily. The second option, called simply the missile launcher, on the other hand, brings the Exorcist up to 195 points, but offers 3d3 strength 8 shots with 3 armor penetration and d6 damage. That's a lot more worthwhile, as that can do some serious damage to heavily resilient targets at a long range of 48 inches. In many ways, this is essentially giving you a ton of multi-melta shots, and as we've seen, the multi-meltas are very powerful weapons. However, you are definitely paying a premium for these melta shots, but the long range makes up for it in certain ways. For stratagems, the Exorcist has 2 special options, the first being a stratagem that for 1 single command point will reduce enemy leadership if the enemy is within 12 inches of the Exorcist, and while there may be uses for this, it generally won't come into play, so don't think about it too much, though know that it's there in case you really need that leadership reduction for your enemy for some reason, and they happen to be within range of that Exorcist. The second option, known as the Devastating Refrain, allows you to reroll any and all dice for the type characteristic when shooting with one of the Exorcist's missile weapons, and this only costs costs you 1 command point, which is rather nice as you can retain high rolls and only reroll the low rolls to determine the number of shots that the weapon gets. It's not a stratagem that will make or break the model, but it's definitely a nice ability to have when you really want to push the Exorcist and you're shooting at a priority target. In any case, if you do run an Exorcist, remember it's a powerful unit, but it's expensive and has its limitations. You want to place it near a character to buff its survivability as well as its output, and you'll definitely want to put some kind of screening unit because remember, both the missile weapons are blast weapons. Now the Mortifiers make great screening units in this case because they have enough range with their heavy bolters to target things during screening duty while also being incredible melee threats for anything that happens to get into range of threatening the Exorcist. And as such, the Mortifiers and the Exorcist make great partners in crime within a list, despite many people assuming that the Mortifier is simply a melee unit instead of one that can actually function as a shooting unit, as would be the case where it is screening for the Exorcist. Now we come to the final heavy support choice, which is the Penitent Engine. It is much like the Mortifier, building from the same kit, but it has a slower movement speed at 7 inches and a weaker stat line. More so, while it can take the buzz blades or flails like the Mortifier, it can only take a heavy flamer and does not have the option to pick up heavy bolters. More so, the only special abilities it has is Zealot, which is somewhat mediocre seeing as it has one less weapon skill than the Mortifier to begin with, so those rerolls aren't going to do as much for you as just having a better weapon skill on the Mortifier is going to do more for you. And instead of having a 6+ feel no pain save, the Penitent Engine has a 5+ feel no pain save. That's a nice little buff to survivability, but it's really not going to do that much for you in the long run, and all of this would be fine if you were able to take the Penitent Engine for a substantial points reduction in comparison to the Mortifier. But the Mortifier is priced so aggressively as is, this unit only offers a 10-point reduction coming in at 50 points per Penitent Engine. I just don't see where this unit fits into the army, as anything it can do the Mortifier can just do better. And while it does have access to the same special stratagem as the Mortifier to gain a second round of melee attacks for 3 command points, it does have the issue that due to its lower weapon skill, it's actually worse to use that stratagem with the Penitent Engine than the Mortifiers. I'd say this is one of those units that's kind of a dud, as another unit in the army and in the same unit type slot just does a better job at the same things than it does. Hopefully in the future they do something to make this unit more distinct from the Mortifier so that it has its own special niche. However, considering the heavy support choice has 3 good options, including one of the most versatile options in the whole army, it's not the end of the world to have one that isn't very playable. Who knows, things can change in the future and maybe they'll give the Penitent Engine something special, though in the meanwhile it does build out of the same kit as the Mortifier, so you're not really losing anything by owning it as well. Anyway, that's the end of this video. If you've enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out, and if you see an opportunity to help a new player out, please share the content as well. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.